afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Rosenwald, and I'm a George Mason alumnus, class of 2008. I'm honored to be back at Mason to introduce this next panel, Character Assassination in the Media Spectrum. My own studies were in conflict analysis and resolution, and my work over the past decade has included public affairs and branding roles at several media organizations. I mention this background because group dynamics and issues of character have always been very important to me, and my work has given me a front row seat to observe how these issues are playing out in the modern media. This entire three-day conference, and of course this next panel, are sponsored by Mason and the university's Character Assassination and Reputation Politics Research Lab, or CARP. I'm grateful an organization like CARP exists, and that we're seeing an entire panel session dedicated just to the role of the media in character and reputation politics. That's because so much is happening. So quickly, and that it's important to step back and take stock of the larger picture and the role that the media serves in shaping that picture. And so again, thank you all for coming. And with that, I'll turn over to the panel's moderator, Richard Sheehe. He is a senior research fellow in Mason's Department of Communications and the director of the Mason-affiliated stratcom360.org project for applied best practices in strategic communication.
Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming out. And thanks for Alex. He spent a lot of time helping get a lot of these panelists here today. And I definitely want to give a shout out to Serge Samoyenko, because for every minute or hour we spend getting some value out of this, he has spent many hours and days, weeks, working to get this conference going. So I really, really want to be grateful to Serge. I definitely appreciate his work. You know, I was talking yesterday with some folks here at the reception about one of the reasons that I think this character assassination and reputation politics program is so important, because it brings together all sorts of different disciplines and all sorts of different ways to practice those disciplines, from the academic sphere to the practitioner sphere. I myself fall pretty squarely on the practitioner side of that, although I've taught and been affiliated with universities. By and large, my career has been spent either in the media or in public affairs. And throughout that, that experience, the idea of character and truth and some of the basic things that we're going to be talking about today have come up again and again and again. And I think what's really valuable to have a research lab like this is that we can step back and see some of the context and see some of the dynamics at work, and at the same time not step back so far that we can't keep our eyes, you know, squarely focused on how things are playing out, how things are happening in the real world. My own background is I was a correspondent for the NBC radio network at the time. And at the time I was covering the White House. This is when the Monica Lewinsky scandal was happening. It's not a joke to say that I probably made more money in overtime that year than I did in my regular salary for the network. And in the process, we were also busy just covering that some of the larger themes about character and reputation really was hard to really think about what the larger context was. And I think that those types of concerns are magnified even further now that we have a very quickened, high-velocity cycle of information across what we call a media spectrum. And that's sort of what I think I'd like to sort of mention here, is that the title of this panel is called Character Assassination in the Media Spectrum. And it's a very strategic use of that term, because I think that if you look at there's a whole spectrum, a whole range of media, way more than when I was in the news business in the 1990s. You know, you have what you could call straight news now. You have journalistic analysis and opinion, and then of course, you know, the social media. And we're going to hear a lot more about this spectrum here. And I think our goal is really to sort of talk to these folks who live and work in it day in and day out, about the impacts of character assassination and reputation issues, where and how it happens and in the media or to the media, and some of the opportunities for governance and safeguards as the media go about their work and as the public goes about consuming and contributing to that media. So the idea of this media spectrum, I think we're going to sort of keep that top of mind again and again, because we really think about the media, I think, in the most useful way to think about the media is as a series of dynamics across a spectrum. I mentioned the different kinds of media outlets, but there's also, even within that, different political or ideological viewpoints. I think throughout the next hour or so, you'll probably see some evidence of differing viewpoints. And there's also a spectrum or a range of formats, from the 7-second soundbite on the news or the 7-word meme on Facebook to some of the longer features or an interview program. What's the difference between an editor choosing a soundbite or an editor deciding on a guest? And if that interview is live and it's for 20 minutes, what are some of the dynamics at work in terms of the perspectives and opinions? What kind of cadence does that conversation have, and how does the interviewer, how do the media, or if it's a call-in program, how are all those interactions governed? And of course, there's this endless stream of content on social media, which in many cases is ungoverned. And it's been fascinating just to talk and sidebar a bit on some of the ways that we are really seeing folks learn to analyze and track media sentiment at the velocity and the speed of where they're coming in social media. So I just think that that's sort of the backdrop for what we're trying to explore today. And finally, even just the range of characterizations, even down to the language that we use. I'm thinking to a conversation I had about a couple of weeks ago with a friend of mine who's a midday anchor at NPR, National Public Radio, and we were sitting around the table with her and a couple other folks, including some political activists very much on the left. And we were talking about the difference between using the word unsubstantiated. When is something unsubstantiated? When is it a misrepresentation? When is it a falsehood? When it is a lie? Or when is something absolute libel or slander? And the interesting thing that came up in that conversation was the activists were saying, why aren't you always calling something a blatant lie, a blatant lie? And it came out that even if you could characterize, these types of statements that we'll probably talk about in the political context, even if something rises to that occasion or rises to that level all the time, there's still a role to be played in terms of how we choose to characterize it. Otherwise, there's issues of desensitization. So that's just a little snippet of some of the types of things we're going to try to sort of look into, some of the axes along which we can understand the media spectrum. So to help us do this, we've got 4 panelists, and I'm going to introduce them, starting with Bob. This is alphabetical order here, so I can't rejigger. Bob Cusack, raise your hand here. He's the managing editor of The Hill. He's been reporting on policy and politics in the nation's capital since 1995. Before joining The Hill in 2003, he served as the chief editor at Inside Washington Publishers. And over his career, he's garnered 5 awards from the National Press Club and the Society for Professional Journalists for investigative articles on a range of issues, including national security, healthcare, and presidential politics. Hugo Gurdon is next to him. He's the editorial director of the Washington Examiner and former editor-in-chief of The Hill. And he's also been an editor and reporter at the Daily Telegraph of London and the National Post of Canada. His writing has appeared in such publications as the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and The Guardian. And you are in alphabetical order. Daniel Lippman is next. He is a reporter for Politico, and he's co-author of Politico's widely read, influential morning newsletter Playbook. And I should say parenthetically that he has placed some sign-up cards on the seats around the room here. So if you're interested in getting in on that publication, Playbook, feel free to do that. Before joining Politico, he was a fellow covering environmental news for E&E Publishing, and he was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. He's also worked for Reuters and the Huffington Post. And then finally, Alan Rosenblatt is a longtime social media strategist and director of digital research at Lake Research Partners. He's got a PhD in political science, and his quarter-century career includes teaching the first ever, this is interesting, the first ever course on digital politics in 1995, right here at George Mason University. He's also created enterprise social media programs at the Center for American Progress, and he's taught digital politics at Johns Hopkins, American, George Washington University. His blogs appear on socialmediatoday.com and elsewhere, and his handle is @DrDigipol. So welcome, panelists. It's really great to have you here. And I'd like to start with the first question. I have a few questions just to sort of get things going, but really do encourage at a certain point for us to start thinking about some questions you might have. Love to have you participate. And previous in the sessions, we had extra microphones to go around, which we don't have here. So if you do ask a question later on as we get things going, just please feel free to speak up. So, first question is based on something that just happened last month. I'm thinking of the recent description by President Trump of the media as being, quote, an enemy of the people. And is this something we can consider character assassination or not? And I really do mean this as an open-ended question because throughout our session today, our time together, this is really a forum to share many different views and to try to respect and examine all the different views that may come up. So on this question of enemy of the people, on the one hand, this is a term that even Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in a 1956 speech condemned as being too toxic because, in his words, it, quote, eliminated the possibility of any kind of ideological fight. On the other hand, we could just see this term as a form of hyperbole, a political characterization that's just a matter of personal or rhetorical style. I'm thinking of our keynote speaker this morning, Eric Denzol, when he was talking about when he worked in the Reagan White House and Ronald Reagan said something about the majority of pollution was caused by trees. And rather that being something that was an enduring impediment on his presidency, it was just, hey, he just says things like this. So it's possible to interpret this in many different ways, but I'd like to sort of use that as sort of the opening question of the panel. And I will take the liberty of throwing this question first to Daniel Lippman of POLITICO, because POLITICO has the distinction of being one of those news organizations that was shut out of a recent White House press briefing. It's the first time that has ever happened. So for
Badge of honor.
For that reason alone, I will sort of throw that question to you because regardless of your particular thoughts, I'm guessing it's a question that has some particular resonance for you at POLITICO. Is an enemy of the people, is that something we could consider character assassination of the media or not?
This term, was kind of unexpected that a president of a democracy would use that to describe the media, which is, kind of an essential part of holding leaders accountable. And I feel like it's part of a concerted strategy by President Trump and the Trump White House to discredit the media and almost cow us into reporting uncritically on, what's going on in the White House. And I think this has been happening since Trump declared. And because of the tough, critical coverage of the administration by the media, including Politico, he sees a need to try to discredit mainstream reporting, which is not, what we do at Politico is not opinion among our reporters. It's just trying to get the facts and to get new information. And there was a perfect example of their strategy last weekend where our reporters wrote a story about how Sean Spicer was trying to shut leaks down from the press office. And so they've been checking staffer phones. And so we broke that story, and one of our reporters, Alex Eisenstadt, who's one of the best reporters in the business, what happened was the White House went to a publication and tried to smear him and said that when he was talking to the White House on the phone, that he laughed when when the topic of the dead U.S. soldier in the recent raid a few weeks ago, which went awry, that he laughed when that soldier was brought up, and there was no evidence to support that. And so it was a direct smear against one of our reporters for, who's tangled with Spicer in the past. And but I don't think that is going to work because I think the media is redoubling its efforts to hold the administration accountable. And I think Trump wants good coverage because he craves the media and he loves, he calls CNN unwatchable, but that means he watches it sometimes. And so it's kind of so ironic that the president who has loved the media's attention the most is the one who's the most critical in recent history.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Or other thoughts, Hugo.
Shortly after.
Is his microphone on? Right up there.
I don't know. Okay. Shortly after the president had made that, had called the press the enemy of the people, he commented that this was being misrepresented and said, what he said was that the fake news media were the enemy of the people. And I didn't remember that. So I went back and had a look at the tweet in which he had used that phrase. And in fact, that is indeed what he said. And actually, one of the points that I would make is that, going back to Khrushchev, I don't think anyone would accuse Donald Trump of having deep historical knowledge, so I don't suppose that he was thinking of it in the same way. I think he was using it it was just language that he used rather than deliberately referring back to its use during the Cold War. But anyhow, when Donald Trump in the press conference, described the fake news media, whatever that is, as being the enemy of the people, he had originally said that he came to Washington to overturn what he called an embedded or entrenched, I think it was, power structure. And he made it plain that he regarded some of the media in that way. And so I would not describe it as character assassination, because I think character assassination requires that you know that what you're saying is not true. You're not describing somebody accurately. It's not sufficient that you're not describing them accurately, but you need to know that you're not describing them accurately deliberately to do them damage. If you think that you're being accurate and you say something defamatory about them, that is not in itself wrong. Defamation is part of what we do. There is a defense of defamation, which is that what you're saying is true. Now, you can debate with Donald Trump whether what he's saying is true, and I think probably most people would regard it as false, but I think that it isn't character assassination because he believes that it is true that a lot of the media are part of an entrenched power structure, and that was what he was sent to Washington to overturn.
So, a couple things. First, the tweet, interestingly, about the press being the enemy of the people, is a very, I think, should be a monumental one here, because he actually tweeted and then deleted the tweet, which is my understanding is a violation of the laws governing the archiving of official communications. And the original tweet said, "The fake news media," parentheses, failing New York Times, CNN, NBC, and many more, and is not my enemy, it is the enemy of the people, and then in all caps, sick, exclamation point. He deleted that and retweeted it moments later without the word sick. Okay. Yeah, added what?
He added a couple more outlets, I think.
Right. So, so first of all, this is an open-ended list. So to say that it's only a specific list is a little dishonest. Second, the very accusation and assassination itself, the process by which he delivered it, he broke the law doing it by deleting the tweet in the first place. Fortunately, ProPublica's POLITICO's platform archives everything he deletes automatically. In fact, yesterday he tweeted and deleted, "I hereby demand a second investigation after Schumer of Pelosi for her close ties to Russia and lying about it." So the president is using Twitter himself to doing a lot of this character assassination. But backing up, I think on a much larger scale, I think the important thing to look at here is it's not just about assassinating the character of the media. What the attacks on the media is doing is setting a precedent for making such attacks based on a mistaken story, a mistake in a story here, some isolated examples of mistakes from outlets that are by and large very accurate, and then using that as a criteria to declare them fake and to declare them an enemy. And by doing so, it not just helps to discredit the media as an industry, as a critic of the Fourth Estate, but it is a criteria for establishing this methodology for discrediting any critic of the president who makes any mistake ever. And that sets up the opportunity for the administration and his political operation to go around and potentially plant stories that are fake in the news media. And as soon as people pick up those stories and repeat them, he has a vehicle now to discredit them as fake and them as unworthy and assassinate their character. So he's created an ability for his own operation to go out and destroy people, and trains the public to accept this methodology as legitimate.
Bob Cusack.
I mean, I think that Trump is definitely trying to discredit the media, and it's what he's done. But I also think the media had a very tough year in 2016. There are journalists, and there are many of them, and you can go back and look at the tapes, where they said, number one, this guy is not going to run. Number two, when he got in, he's no chance he can actually be in the top three or win the primary. And then when he won the primary, basically wire to wire, there's no way he can win the general election. So, and there are people in the media that are not referees. They're antagonists toward the president. And that, I think, helps him, because that's not everybody. And that doesn't mean everybody's biased against him. But he's able to go after certain outlets or certain reporters who have been wrong at every turn about what Donald Trump was going to do. Donald Trump is a lot of things. One of the things he's not is subtle. He goes after the media, and I think sometimes the media does a disservice to itself when it takes the bait and it doesn't kind of do reflection of why we got a lot of things wrong in 2016. I mean, basically the big question of 2016 was, who's going to win? And we got it wrong. So, listen, I'm a big fan of the First Amendment. I think what he did at that White House press gaggle, which the Hill was also not allowed to go into, was ridiculous. And they took a lot of heat for it. So, but I also think that actions speak louder than words. Words are important in politics. And of course, the words and the tweets of the president are important. And he's talked about curbing the First Amendment. I got a major problem with that. But he hasn't proposed it since he's been president. So some of this is just a game. And he plays the game very, very well. And on that, and also I think the media is too thin-skinned. Honestly, we dish it out, and we got to take it. So I think the media is good when it's united, like on that press gaggle, where some outlets, handpicked, were allowed. Now, listen, if he's going to have a private dinner with conservative journalists, that's fine. That's what President Obama did with liberal journalists. But when you're having a public press conference or public information, and you're just allowing some in and not others, that's totally wrong. So I think that there's kind of give and take on both sides here.
It's interesting when you said words are important, because as many of you know, a lot of the discussions so far and some of the submissions and presentations have been about rhetoric and the use of words. And even, in the preamble here, talking about the difference between a falsehood and a lie. I remember that pivotal interview on Alternative Facts with Chuck Todd and Kellyanne Conway. He's like, that's a falsehood, that's a falsehood, that's a falsehood. He didn't cross that threshold into calling it a lie. And it's interesting to hear, I've heard the words discredit. And it's not like we can answer these questions of what's the difference between discrediting and character assassination, but I find it very, very interesting that as almost like a a running theme throughout this conference, and certainly this panel, is what kind of words we're thinking about. But beyond that, what I thought was really interesting is this issue of intention. And there's one more issue on one more way to think about this enemy of the people thing is when I saw both of your responses, Daniel Lippman and Hugo Gurdon, I thought it was really interesting because the emotion seemed, there was an energy around your response, Daniel, in terms of having received that message of enemy of the people and probably seeing it concretized in not being invited to this briefing. I'm not like a mind reader, but I could tell there was a certain energy around that. As you said, a badge of honor. And Hugo, I think that what I heard a little bit was just sort of the way he meant it in terms of how that message is sent, in terms of he may not even have known that was a historical reference with particular resonance. So how much does the intention and how it's meant to be sent and how it's meant to receive change or characterize whether something is really a character assassination or discrediting? How it's almost like it's a movable target in terms of how a message is sent and how it's received, and how do we navigate the differences that may be between how it's meant to be sent and received?
I remember when George H.W. Bush was president, a couple of years into his presidency, he was sitting down for a television interview and said to the interviewer, "I'm only now discovering how powerful the word of the president is, of how the words that I use lead to impacts that I may or may not have intended." It takes a while to figure that out. I'm thinking here about, when we talk about what matters, the intention, the words, or the way it was received, we're starting to get into the world of postmodern deconstruction of communication, which is fine. But the bottom line is that, when you're talking about the bully pulpit, the impact, the way it's received, is often most important and far more important usually than the way it was intended in the first place. Take, for example, the whole issue with the rising attacks on synagogues, Jewish community centers, mosques, a lot of religious and hate crime going on in this country. Trump has constantly been saying, "I'm not trying to do that. That's not my intention." But the words he's using, the images he's been sharing, have and the people he's put around him have conveyed a message that has been received by people to act this way. And so there still is a disconnect, I think, between his understanding of the fact that the words he uses has impact beyond what he intends. Mm-hmm. And so the issue of character assassination rises to, there are times when he's going to be assassinating character without him ever not realizing or intending to do it. And that gives him cover to pretend he's not doing it on purpose in other situations.
I think that most of what I'd agree with most of what you say, almost certainly true. I think even those who don't think of Trump as being as dangerous or as malign as some others watch his press conferences and listen to his rhetoric. And the image that I often have is of a sort of clumsy adolescent with a Ming vase in his hands, and you're constantly wondering if he's going to drop it and it's going to smash. His understanding of words, or at least the impression you get of his understanding of words, often that he uses them extremely clumsily and loosely, although, and I'd agree with Bob here, he often uses them extremely effectively. But I don't think that it's possible to assassinate someone accidentally, or to assassinate something or the media accidentally. I think that I would agree that he wishes to discredit a lot of the media, and he thinks that they are doing a disservice, as he said in that statement, to the people of the country. I think at the same time, he believes that, and that simply stating a very uncomfortable truth, which is the way that he sees it, is not the same thing as character assassination.
All right, I want to come back at some point to this this question of intention and whether it's possible to accidentally do it or whether it has to be intentional. But I want to ask another question now that refers to the Goldwater rule. Is anyone familiar with the Goldwater rule? As background, in 1964, in the presidential campaign, a magazine called Fact Magazine surveyed and published opinions of more than 1,000 psychiatrists about Barry Goldwater being so-called unfit for office. And there were quotes that appeared in this article, such as, "He's a dangerous lunatic," grandiose thoughts. And Goldwater successfully sued subsequently, and he got $75,000 in damages. And in 1973, as a result of that, largely, the American Psychiatric Association enacted what is known as the Goldwater Rule, claiming that it is unethical for any psychiatrist to diagnose a public figure's condition unless he or she has conducted an examination and has been granted proper authorization for such a statement. Now, in light of that, last month, February 13th, the New York Times published a letter to the editor titled, quote, "A Mental Health Warning on Trump." And it was signed by 35 psychiatrists claiming that he's unstable, unfit for office, and saying, quote, "Too much is at stake to be silent any longer." So I'd like to throw that out as from the perspective of the media. Is that a betrayal of the Goldwater rule? Is it even a case of character assassination against President Trump?
I mean, I think so. I mean, but at the same time, that I think that's the beauty of the First Amendment, is that you don't have to adhere to certain rules or not. Each organization has its own rules. And I mean, Democrats on the House floor have said that he's unfit for the presidency because of his mental capabilities. So,
but they're not psychiatrists.
Exactly. Now, I think that then they take criticism for their criticism of the president. But I mean, listen, I don't think in this area you can have too much sympathy for the president. I mean, a couple years ago, my son was about 14 years old. I said, "Do you ever want to be president?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "The president takes a lot of crap." And I also think that, I mean, look at character assassination. I mean, that's how Trump became president. I mean, Lion Ted, Little Marco, Crooked Hillary. I mean, he was going after his rivals. I mean, that's our political system. He did it very well. I mean, he was a bully.
But he's not a psychiatrist.
No, he's not. But I would venture to think that he knows more than psychiatrists, or he thinks he knows more. So listen, I think that it's fair game, and in politics now, everything is fair game. It's very nasty, and but I do think that people pay a political price when they're diagnosing from the House floor or in a newspaper about a patient that they've never diagnosed, and they're going to take political heat for doing that if they go too far, and that's I think the nasty, but also the beauty of our system.
I think that one of the things that one should be acknowledged in a discussion of this sort, that character assassination, or at least defamation, is the currency of political discussion. It's so much easier to say that someone is either an idiot or malign, a fool or a knave, than to address their argument. It kind of goes all the way back to the philosopher Foucault, who wouldn't address a point that was made. He'd say, "Who's saying it?" It's so much easier to attack the person saying it. It's political. I was talking to a political consultant. It's actually about 30 years ago, covering the election in Mexico, and he was saying negative advertising will always be there because it's so effective. I can't remember what order of magnitude more effective it was that he said. I can't remember what the multiple was. But whilst politicians who want to be elected have to have a vision for what they want to do with the country, negative advertising, the dragging down of the opponents, is extremely effective. I mean, you think back to the 2012 election, and they turn and Romney was turned into a sort of predatory striped pants plutocrat who caused cancer in his workers. When he's a thoroughly decent man, and it's just that is what is done within the whole political discussion. There was an extremely good example, I think, just yesterday, where Charles Murray went to speak at Middlebury, and you probably read something about this. Charles Murray is classified by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a white nationalist, and there was a demonstration. He was shut. He was shut down. He and the college professor who was sort of shepherding him around were attacked. She's now in a neck brace. I would say that the characterization of Charles Murray as a white nationalist is absolutely character assassination, and because I think that any genuine reading of what he says would just show he's a social scientist with views which are controversial. The point I'm making is that discussing character assassination in the media, and for example, the letter that you just cited, has to be seen in the context that this is the way that political discussion is conducted, both here and in other countries.
So far, I'm not hearing much pushback about the role of psychiatrists, weighing in the version of op-eds and whatnot as being something, that's beyond the pale. So I'm sort of throwing that out, just trying to keep the focus on the role of the mental health community, mental health professionals. So Daniel Lippman, Alan Rosenblatt.
I think just as Bob said, these people, it's not like a criminal law that you can't speak out on mental fitness of politicians. And so I would give them...
So do you think the American Psychiatric Association was sort of actually being too restrained all those decades? And maybe the answer is yes.
I think all the rules are kind of out the window for, this administration. And so... if the association wants to sanction their own members or throw them out, that's their prerogative. But I don't have a lot of criticism. I think people should speak out if they feel like that if they feel like that New York Times letter was worth it for readers to know about, then I am not going to criticize them. I just wanted to leapfrog on something that Hugo had talked about, which is intention. And I don't think that. I think that for Trump, he talked about intention of character assassination. I kind of take Trump at face value, whereby if he maligns the media, that I don't think that it's. I think we should take him at his word, and that he wants to, for the entire campaign, he had an opponent, an enemy in Hillary Clinton and Democrats, and now he needs a new enemy, and so he's picked the media. And I think you've seen the media's role to be effective in some of the recent controversies in terms of Mike Flynn. Mike Flynn would still be National Security Advisor for President Trump if the Washington Post had not revealed and the New York Times about his discussions with the Russian ambassador, and Jeff Sessions would not have recused himself because no one would know about what those gentlemen had done. And so I think that, we're reminded every day of the importance of the media. And so I think he wants his supporters to not trust what they read from the mainstream press and what they watch on CNN, because he knows if they do, then he could lose further support among his base, because they would understand more about what's going on in the White House.
And Alan Rosenblatt, from a social media standpoint, just staying on this Goldwater rule, is the fact that the social media landscape is so diverse with so many opinions out there. Does that change at all the role of so-called experts, whether they be psychiatrists or whatnot, in terms of how important it is for them to observe certain strictures about what to say and what not to say?
Well, I think the important thing about social media, to start there, is that there are so many viewpoints that are being pushed out and being picked up that it becomes even more important for people who have expertise to speak up in order to compensate for those who are echoing and parroting those who don't have expertise on these comments. So I would say that that would provide an argument to throw out the Goldwater rule. With regard to the specific letter, my understanding of the letter is that it stopped short of diagnosis. It didn't actually give a diagnosis to Trump, but just looked at his pattern of behavior and said the behavior in and of itself is dangerous. And I don't see that as a violation of the Goldwater rule at all. And also, it's like saying that reporters, because they're reporters, should never express a political opinion, which we know that that's hard to do, if not impossible. I also just want to quickly point out that we have to be careful. Just a quick comment back to the media thing. Daniel started out by talking about how Politico reports the facts, and then I'm sorry, Bob mentioned how the media got it all wrong often in 2016, but all the examples you gave were prognostication, not reporting on facts. And so I would argue that what the media got wrong by and large in 2016 that caused it a lot of trouble was opinions being expressed and extrapolations, not reporting of the news. And the conflation of the two has been a major problem in undermining the validity and reputation of the media and allowed for Trump to pursue this line of attack. And that when we don't make that distinction clear, we feed into his attack.
I'm glad you mentioned that last part, because to the extent that that's true, my sense is that the media is somewhat complicit in terms of the programming. So much programming is as much about opinion as about facts. And you're saying...
Well, the thing to note is, like, for example, Fox News Network is an entertainment company, not a news company. Murdoch split his holdings into a news division, which was the print news and publishing, and an entertainment company, which included Fox News Network. Within Fox News Network, there is a news division and an entertainment division. Sam Shepard runs the news division, but Hannity and O'Reilly, all those evening shows, they're entertainers. They're hosts. They're not even... Their contracts don't even stipulate that they are journalists. They are not obligated to follow any journalistic ethics. Hannity was allowed to give money to political candidates without suspension, whereas Keith Olbermann at MSNBC, when he was a journalist, was suspended and ultimately fired for it. And that conflation is confusing to the audience because it's never clarified, and it allows for all sorts of, interesting games to be played.
Okay, I have two more questions that I want to raise, and then definitely leave time for some questions. So start thinking about questions that you might want to ask the panel. The first of the final two that I have, it does get back to this idea of intention, and I think you said, Hugo, it's not possible to assassinate someone's character accidentally. So I'm hoping to operationalize that a bit and sort of put it in a real context, and that's why I want to bring back an individual, Monica Lewinsky. Because for those who remember or who've lived through it, she had a friend named Linda Tripp, and in conversation she mentioned that she had been having interactions with President Clinton, and Linda Tripp then recorded those statements, and it was all history from there. Now, I don't think anyone could argue that Monica Lewinsky was the primary target for these activities, but in the process, her reputation suffered, and even to the extent that I believe she's spoken in some context in recent years about character assassination. So I'd really like to have you think through and talk through, in a case like that, was there any intentional assassination of her character, or if she was more collateral damage, does it matter what we call it, because her life was changed forever? So what are your thoughts on that in terms of character assassination and intention?
I think that she was collateral damage, and very unfortunately so. I think you're absolutely right that the intention was not primarily to do any damage to her, but she has presumably suffered for the consequences of that for the past 15 years or 20 or however long it is. I think it is important, if one is, has seminars on character assassination that the terms are dealt with very carefully. Perhaps the outcome is not any different for Monica Lewinsky in that no one intended that she be destroyed. But it would be interesting. I'd be very interested to hear the other panelists, anybody else's opinion about if intention doesn't matter. What then is the difference between character assassination, defamation, which of course can be accidental, and bias? When is it? If there isn't a difference, doesn't that sort of lead to the idea that one cannot be one cannot be critical, one cannot criticize somebody with what one believes to be a strong case? I mean, if you think that you have a strong case, you make that case against somebody, and it's one of the classic definition of what is defamatory is that it brings somebody into hatred, ridicule, or contempt. Now, obviously, character assassination does that too, but there's an absolute defense against defamation if the facts are true. There's obviously a duty on the part of news organizations to try and make sure that they are true, although in this country you cannot actually be successfully sued unless people can prove actual malice. Nevertheless, there is a moral duty for us to do that.
You know, I think it's important to remember that if somebody's committing armed robbery and they kill somebody in the process, it's murder, right? Collateral damage, even though that is collateral damage to the original intent. So I suspect that a lot of people who are conducting character assassination are not doing it with concern about keeping the collateral damage to a minimum. They spray as hard and wide as they can, and whoever goes down in the process, I don't think the character assassin cares, typically. So that means that the collateral damage is as much an assassination as anything else. That's the way I would see it. I do think it's really important, the point you made with regard to if the facts bear out the attack, it's not really assassination. It's reporting.
That's right. It's an absolute defense.
Yeah, and it should be.
Which actually, the New York Times had that defense at one point when Donald Trump's lawyers threatened to sue for libel after the reporting about the sexual, what came out in terms of the statements. And I remember the publication of the letter of the general counsel of the New York Times saying it's not libel if you've already boasted about this.
And this fits into Trump's attack on CNN with regard to the Russian dossier. CNN's reporting did not reveal the content of that dossier. It's just that the dossier existed, which is true, that there were briefings on it, which were true. And in fact, everything that CNN reported in that article that was the subject of Trump's ire was in fact true. And so he then took that as, that was sort of the pivot point to cutting CNN, calling them fake news and cutting them out of the process. And it was based on them reporting something that was true.
Bob Cusack, Daniel Lippman, your thoughts on this intention versus collateral damage? Or
just to address the Lewinsky affair, I think with Twitter and cable news, it's so much more different than it would have been 40 years ago, when the media often covered for politicians or didn't. The media didn't really write as much about JFK's mistresses. And so, but with the ravenous media now, if you're a private individual like Lewinsky or Paula Broadwell or Alicia Machado, who is the Miss Universe contestant, and then you get swept up into being criticized by a public figure or just being in a controversy, then your life, your reputation can be destroyed. But I also think that since we have the First Amendment, usually you can avoid that just by not getting into. One other point I wanted to make about cable news is that
just keep speaking up.
I feel like oftentimes opinions of have to be a journalist to get the election wrong. And I think in terms of reporting, there should be more of a division between how the media is thought of between articles and newspapers and cable news, which has, for MSNBC, Fox, and CNN, what they do is usually not much news. Panels every day. And so, but I don't think print publications or websites should be lumped in with the rest of the outlets, which are primarily entertainment vehicles to make money. Don't do as much text journalists, and so we shouldn't. I do,
And by the way, did the battery die, or all right? And if the battery did die, if we could sort of switch gears and turn that the lone surviving mic into a handheld. Just don't touch the off button by mistake.
I definitely agree that too much of political coverage, and specifically campaign coverage, gets into predictions as opposed to news. I mean, after Mitt Romney soundly defeated President Obama in the first debate, I was talking to one of the reporters, and the reporter said, "Well, he's going to win anyway." And that can creep into coverage. Now, where it's not so much opinion, but you're writing the word choices you use. And I said, let's not worry about predictions. Let's just write what happened tonight and how the race has completely changed. And of course, ended up being right that Obama won a second term. As far as Lewinsky, I mean, remember that the White House denied it for a long time. And so the White House was basically calling her a liar. And if she didn't keep the blue dress, then history could have been changed somewhat. And he was also, talking about the definition of it depends on the definition of what is. So that was, I think, the White House going after her, and certainly she was collateral damage and was affected forever. And that does happen, as Daniel was saying. That's happened to other people, or to the private people. Obviously, when you have an affair with the president, then you could get into some trouble. But she was, an intern, a young woman. So. I mean, I also think the media has to be careful with, we're talking about basically sex and politics, which is always going to be big. The New York Times ran a story in 2008 when John McCain was running, basically saying that he was having an affair with a lobbyist. And, I always say that in journalism, we're not in a court of law. You don't have to prove it to that extent. But you have to prove it so that the reader believes it. And the story, whether or not it was true or not, did not convince the reader. And it was really a character assassination of McCain because it did not prove it. So I think the media has to be very careful of what it decides to put out there. I agree with you that CNN actually, even though it took a lot of heat from the president, handled the dossier story correctly, in my opinion. BuzzFeed did not. Basically, they said at the top of printing the dossier, said, we have no idea, basically, if this is true. But here it is. That, I think, is irresponsible.
You all know what the dossier he's referring to? Okay. I'm going to ask one more question, but it reminds me of this, again, the wording and the definition of is. One thing I remember about the Lewinsky case is that the first interview President Clinton gave after that story broke was to Jim Lehrer, because it was a pre-scheduled interview on some topic that was completely different. But Lehrer, of course, asked him about it. And President Clinton said, there is no relationship, using a temporal term, there might have been one yesterday, which is really interesting because a lot of what I do is in media training and organizational positioning, and a lot of it comes not just down to organizational strategy on a macro level, but on the terminology that people use. And again, to sort of get back to Eric Denzol, you can use these types of skills to like the Force in Star Wars, for good or for bad. You can use it to help keep a population on track and on target for preventive measures, protective measures in an outbreak of disease, or you can use it to, get through a scandal or get through marriage counseling or whatever. So, but the use of words and the choice of words is really, I think, very pivotal and something that comes back again and again and again. So my last question before we open it up to you folks for the remainder, it has to do with a rule in Europe mostly called the right to be forgotten. Okay, and for those who are probably familiar with, the European Union enacted, and its highest court has since upheld what's called the right to be forgotten law, and it requires Google and other search engines to omit at the request of citizens certain unflattering material that citizens may argue may no longer be relevant. This could be financial misdeeds for the past or other embarrassing episodes that may have happened long ago. There's not something like that in the United States, but again, the European Union and actually several other countries in the world have protections like this, and it's not absolute. It deals with search results. It's not like it then can order the websites which have that material to be expunged, but it does make it more difficult to find information about people's pasts. My question is: this an acceptable tool to safeguard one's character? Or is it an infringement on the free flow of information?
I think it probably is not an acceptable restriction. It seems to me that the information is out there. Banning people from finding it or trying to block off the flow seems to me not a good idea. I don't know enough about the law to really speak precisely to its restrictions, but I would probably say no. I don't think that's a good idea.
I don't think it's good to rewrite history and to pretend that that negative articles about you just did not happen. If people in Europe have a quibble with a story, something online, they should bring it up with the publisher of the website and try to correct the record and have them fix whatever error is out there. And if not, if there's no error, then we should probably let them, let Google reflect what the reality of what's in people's backgrounds. And so I don't think we should force internet companies to scrub negative information on people just because just to protect them. The web is supposed to be an unfettered kind of landscape where you get information from all sides.
3,643. That's the number of website URLs that Donald Trump owns, including every inconceivable, imaginable. Trump sucks, Trump did this, Trump did that. And this is designed to prevent negative Trump websites from rising in the search engine results to the tune of about $10,000+ a year just in URL registration fees. Most people can't afford that. So the advantage goes to rich people in terms of being able to make themselves and criticisms of themselves invisible on the web without a law like in Europe. Now, I'm not saying I like the law to be forgotten, because if it's true, you shouldn't really have the right to expunge the record of true reporting. On the other hand, if it's false, we need some response, and Trump's response is indeed one strategy for taking care of that. I know a writer who got into a lot of trouble on Twitter because she tweeted something to the effect that white privilege was the N-word equivalent for white people, and started getting trolled like crazy, to the point where somebody once contacted her claiming he was a reporter for some outlet, talked to her on the phone, and it turns out he ended up writing and publishing a hatchet job on her on a rather disreputable website, and had an entire network of people who then tweeted it out and shared it on social media and liked it and pushed it out. And now every time you Google her name, this is the first or second result that comes up. And it has severely undermined her ability to get writing jobs, which is her livelihood. This is a problem. This is character assassination. This is something that the European law of the right to be forgotten is designed to fix. She does not have the resources that Donald Trump has to flood the zone in order to push down this negative and rather false article about her below the fold. So I think it's important to understand that there is a freedom of speech issue, and freedom of the press issue, which is paramount here. But at the same time, as you said, if it's not true, it shouldn't be protected, or at least there should be some recourse. And so, to the extent that these laws are designed to protect people against falsehoods being
Well, I should clarify that the right to be forgotten can apply to stuff that's true.
I know that's so. In that context, I think that the European law is far too permissive. I think that if the law were more focused on getting rid of false information that's out there, it would be much more palatable.
Bob Cusack?
I agree with many of the points. I understand what the thinking is behind that law. I don't think it would work here, especially because, and it's a slippery slope, because if it is true, now, as Alan, you were saying, I mean, some things are not fair, and that's not, sounds like a very unfair thing. But if it's a disreputable website, hopefully she can make that case that it is. But that doesn't mean it's fair, and that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt her career. So yeah, I just think it's a slippery slope for that. I mean, human beings, we all make mistakes, and if it's true, it's going to be out there. It's just the way it is in this day and age. And I think that if you're deleting or scrubbing the record of true stuff, then I think that would honestly, that idea for this White House would be, I think, very, very appealing, and that would not be good.
All right, so we do have time just for a couple quick questions. I see some hands raised. So over there in the side there.
We opened up talking about, kind of character assassination of the media in terms of, the media being the enemy of the people. And I was surprised to see representatives of the media say that the media have essentially contributed to their own character assassination by saying that the media had gotten it wrong last year. Quite frankly, the media had gotten a lot of it right. Most of the polls had indicated that was going to be a two-point race. Hillary Clinton won by 2.86 million votes, which was just about 2%. This was the first election that had not accounted for the voter suppression laws. We do know that there were a number of votes that were suppressed in the election. There was no anticipation that you were going to have the FBI director drop a bomb like he did in terms of the email scandals. That wasn't kind of factored into the coverage. Plus, we had the Russian influence on the election, so we don't know how much that is. When a swing of 35,000 votes could have given Hillary Clinton the presidency, I would say that the media did a pretty darn good job. The other thing that I want to address, though, was this whole thing about Donald Trump and intention. Basically, Donald Trump is operating from this syllogism. The media are the enemy of Trump. Trump is the people. The media are the enemy of the people. Now, that means that he's either a megalomaniac, he is a liar, or he's very much out of touch with reality. And I'm not sure that, I'm not sure that saying that he has lack of intent doesn't mean that he's actually assassinating the character of the media.
I think you raised some good points. I mean, listen, I think the media did get a lot right, but one of the things that, I mean, you can blame the polls, but some polls were right, very few, but most of the polls were wrong, no doubt about it. And we knew the rules of the Electoral College going in, and that's the game you have to win. I don't think enough people in the media have done enough introspection of thinking why we didn't think he would win. Now, we all knew he had a shot. I mean, there was a path to 270, but he was going to have to pull off some upsets. Personally, I never thought he'd get to 300 electoral votes. A lot of states were close. I mean, even Minnesota that she won, she barely won. But he barely won some states as well. So, but I do think that I was in Ohio a couple weeks before the election, And just being there, I was like, there's no way Hillary Clinton can win this state. There's just no way. I went to New Hampshire in the fall of 2015, and nobody basically in Washington was writing about the opioid crisis. I went there, and I'm like, holy smokes, this is a huge issue. And it's just kind of a lesson that you have to get out of the Washington Beltway bubble. You have to talk to real people. I mean, the phenomenon of Donald Trump, I have some in-laws in Pennsylvania, and when Donald Trump announced, and then he got into almost immediate controversy when he said that John McCain is not a war hero, and I asked one of my family members, I'm like, what do you think about that? I mean, John McCain not a war hero? It's kind of crazy things to say, anything? And the response was, yeah, he says crazy things, but we love him. And that, I was like, wow, maybe he is Teflon. And he was the most Teflon candidate I've ever seen.
Okay, now we want to cycle through as many questions as we can. I guess you've got the mic.
I'm not really sure how I want to ask this question, but I want to know, in your, from what you can recall, can you remember any instances where the media has attacked the president or the White House about an ongoing policy issue where that information reached the president said the media is right, and then because of your criticisms or your attacks, actually influenced a change in policy? In other words, have you guys done something right that has forced the president to sit up and say they're right and actually made a change in policy?
It's a great question, and I don't have an easy answer. One can't necessarily tell. Certainly, I cannot recall the president coming out and saying, I hadn't thought of that, I got that wrong. But just to take, for example, the travel ban executive order, I don't think that the decision to issue a new one was entirely because the Ninth Circuit blocked the first one. I think that there are a lot of publications across the spectrum, including the Washington Examiner, which were highly critical of the original one and said that it went too far. And whilst one doesn't know how much influence one has, he certainly didn't say, "Hey, good call, I'm going to do what you say." I imagine that the broad and criticism across the political spectrum probably was part of why he decided that there should be a second one, which would pass muster more easily.
All right, I'm going to sort of try to get as many questions as I can, so if the panelists don't mind tag teaming, unless you have something pressing on each question. Next question.
Shifting the focus to the American public, and just a hypothetical here, let's say we stay stuck in this mode of attack and counterattack, and attack and counterattack actually becomes the culture of the identity of governance around the administration. Rich, I'll come back to your word about desensitizing. At what point does the American public either stay tuned in, or are they no longer interested in tuning in and just really become desensitized to absolutely this kind of attack and counterattack mode?
I think you're already seeing there's a recognition on behalf of the media that every tweet by Trump or by his critics, they don't always deserve headline news and a big story and for it to dominate the coverage of the day. And so, because there's a lot that Trump is doing behind the scenes and his administration is working on that they are not tweeting about. And, I can point to the State Department, where a lot of diplomats, they complain of being not feeling very wanted or needed anymore because there's not as much work to do in that cabinet agency. And so those are things that are sometimes much more important than if Trump just goes off on someone on Twitter. And so I think we in the media should not be should not pay attention to every tweet and give it equal value. We should assess newsworthiness of attacks both on Twitter and in public forums.
We have time for two more questions. Oh, okay, go ahead.
So first of all, I would say that Trump seems to be intuiting the fact that there's some desensitization going on, because instead of tweeting once this morning that Obama illegally wiretapped Trump Tower, he tweeted 4 or 5 times to do that, to make the point over and over and over again. No evidence, just assertions. The other real key thing is that the desensitization that is occurring is clearly along partisan lines. We're seeing in opinion polls that poll after poll shows that approval and other related positive opinions about Trump are going up among Republicans and down among Democrats. And every time these things happen, these snafus or these crazy tweets or these unhinged press conferences take place, it just drives his base up higher and drives the opposition down lower. So there's desensitization going on, but it seems to be only among his, it seems to take that form.
Okay, another question.
Could you please comment on the media's coverage of foreign disinformation campaigns which have existed long before Donald Trump has ever become a candidate, but which has only intensified after the chaotic environment of last year? And would you say that this coverage is rather conveniently leaving out considerations that the intelligence community would be looking at, such as the fact that you don't really know what the goal of particular meddling is in reality, that it has been spun a certain way?
Oh, really? I don't know if I have an answer for that.
That's a first. For all of you, that applies to you all. I'll hold you in good character, all 4 of you.
Well, certainly, there's been some, there's a lot in there. I know that the coverage that's been going on with regard to the whole fake news origins has been very interesting. There was some coverage early on about the role that a handful of teens in Macedonia, creating a bunch of websites driving fake news into the U.S. market simply for the purpose of driving clicks to advertising on their websites. No political purpose at all, other than the fact that they figured out these political stories would get traction. That was there was a fair amount of coverage of that, and I know that Media Matters, for example, has been doing a lot of research on fake news and has identified that. But also within that context, that opened the door to provide political cover for more political dirty tricks use of fake news by both the Russians and by the Trump campaign and others to sort of run under the radar of these commercially driven fake news sites, to use these planted stories to shift opinion in the country. So I mean, in that one instance, there's been some coverage, but to be honest, I think you're right. Most of that analysis and coverage is coming place out of an advocacy organization, and much less of it out of the news media itself.
Okay, and we have time just for one more question, thankfully for this side of the room, because we do have another session that comes up shortly. So one last question, please.
I'll try to make it quick. So we're seeing some interesting things journalistically in this current media and political climate, some good and some bad. So on the one hand, allegations that we might be out of touch as an industry with people reflecting the polls, whatever you have to say about that. But on the other, maybe some newfound solidarity. I'm thinking specifically of Sam Shepard defending CNN and its reporting on air, and organizations like AP and The Times and USA Today protesting that certain organizations are being left out of press briefings with the White House. So with these changes, could we, as a journalism industry, as reporters, come out of this for the better? Can this be a good thing for us, either by learning something, or if so, what can we learn?
I think that that Trump has kind of given a newfound energy to why we do what we do, and that there's never been a more important time to be a journalist, and that barring major action on press freedom by President Trump, then the media will be even stronger because of his attacks, and also just because of our dogged reporting over the last couple of years and in the next few years. And so I think that you saw the Washington Post slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness," and so there is there's been this collective sense in the media that that we do play a hugely vital role in guarding democracy, and not just for one side or the other, just the institutions in general. And so I hope that will continue after President Trump, where we hold future leaders to as high a standard as we do him, and that people still stay engaged and care about what we report, and that interest doesn't die down as much as it might because there's no Trump to report on anymore.
Final thoughts?
I think that any criticism which forces the news media to reevaluate what they've done can produce some positive results. I think Bob is right that the political media got quite a lot wrong during last year, and immediately after the result of the election, several outlets, I think the New York Times was one, acknowledged that they needed to get out and do more reporting from those areas, for example, in the Midwest, which Trump won, which were thought to be in the bag for Hillary Clinton. And, we are very glad, for example, to have a reporter called Selena Zito, who reports from Pittsburgh and travels around the industrial Midwest. And she was one of those who really saw the Trump victory coming. And so I think that people can reevaluate after they've made mistakes. And I think that probably it will produce some long-term benefits to the media, yes.
Final thoughts, Bob?
Just one thing. I think it's very important for journalism now, and honestly, the Trump presidency has really helped. It helps TV ratings and it helps web traffic because everyone is so interested. I mean, Donald Trump, I've compared him to Tom Brady. You either love to love him or you love to hate him, but you must digest news about him. Now, so I think that so the role of the press, especially because Trump has this habit of just saying things that are just flat out wrong, is very, very important. But I also think, like, as you know, he's not attending the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I think it's a time for the press to realize, maybe that dinner has gotten a little out of hand. Maybe it's not about journalism anymore. Maybe it's all about celebrities. And I think part of the reason why Trump is not going is because maybe it's gotten away from its roots. And then you have to assess and think, okay, well, how can we make that dinner, which does a lot of valuable scholarships, and really, same thing for journalism is okay, you, instead of reflexively fighting the criticism, and being a defensive mechanism, assessing it and saying, well, maybe we can be better in this or that area. But honestly, I mean, political journalism is a difficult job. A lot of people yell at you, and we work very hard and try to get it right. We're not perfect.
Okay, Alan Rosenblatt, final word before we wrap up.
So I do think that there's some systemic challenges that the media industry has to deal with that is just going to make everything harder. There's been the pressure to make it profitable when that used to not be a drive. The rise of digital has undermined the profitability of the organizations. The rise of social has created a get it first versus get it right kind of mentality. And at the same time that's happening because of the decline in profitability, a lot of senior reporters are no longer on staff. The size of a lot of newsrooms has shrunk. The number of bureaus has shrunk. And so the capacity of the news media to do investigative research, journalism, has just been diminished. And it doesn't matter that there are young journalists who are great, because you don't always, you get better with age, right? Experience. And so that loss of that experience at the other end, and the dilution of that resource, I think, creates all sorts of pressures on the news media that make it very difficult for them to respond. So I am a big champion of the news media, but I also recognize that it's a tough road.
Well, Bob Cusack, Hugo Gurdon, Daniel Lippman, Alan Rosenblatt, thanks so much for joining us. Let's give a hand for our panel. Really appreciate it. Stick around. Mary's got a quick comment. I know that a panel's coming up shortly, so don't go far.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much for taking your time to be with us today and talk about character assassination in the media. As a small token of our appreciation, we have a few gifts for you. First, if Alex Rosenwald could come up here, we have a gift for you. Bob Cusack, Hugo Gurdon, Alan Rosenblatt, and Daniel Lippman, and you, Richard Sheehe. We have small tokens for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.